The cruise ship Ocean's Dream cut through the dark waters of the Pacific, its lights twinkling like stars against the endless black horizon. Most passengers had retired to their cabins for the night, but Sarah Martinez stood alone on the upper deck, gripping the metal railing as salty wind whipped through her long dark hair. She had come on this vacation to forget her troubles back home, to escape the suffocating life that had become her reality after discovering her husband's betrayal. At 32, Sarah was a successful marine biologist who had dedicated her career to studying ocean conservation. Her research on coral reef restoration had earned her recognition in scientific circles, but it had also made her some powerful enemies. 3 months ago, she had published a report exposing illegal dumping by Meridian Industries, a massive shipping corporation that had been secretly disposing of toxic waste in protected marine sanctuaries. The legal battle that followed had been brutal. Meridian's lawyers had tried everything to discredit her work, attacking both her professional credentials and personal life. When tabloid photos of her husband with another woman surfaced just weeks after she filed her lawsuit, Sarah realized the timing was no coincidence. The corporation was playing dirty, using private investigators to dig up anything they could use against her. Her sister Emma had insisted she take this cruise to clear her head before the final court hearing scheduled for next month. "You need to get away from all this mess," Emma had said. "Just 7 days on the ocean, no lawyers, no reporters, no stress. Promise me you'll try to relax." Sarah had reluctantly agreed, booking a single cabin on the luxury liner that would take her from Los Angeles to Hawaii and back. She had hoped the familiar rhythm of ocean waves would calm her racing mind, but instead, she found herself more anxious than ever. Something felt wrong about this trip, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Earlier that evening, she had noticed the same 3 men watching her during dinner. They sat at a corner table, pretending to enjoy their meals while stealing glances in her direction. When she moved to the bar afterward, they followed at a distance. Their behavior reminded her of the private investigators who had been trailing her for weeks before she left San Diego. Now, standing alone on the deck at nearly midnight, Sarah wondered if she should have trusted her instincts and stayed home. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, and she suddenly felt very small and vulnerable. The sound of footsteps on the deck behind her made her pulse quicken. "Dr. Martinez?" a voice called out. She turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit approaching her. His smile seemed friendly enough, but something about his cold gray eyes made her skin crawl. "I'm Robert Kane, representing Meridian Industries. I believe you know why I'm here." Sarah's heart began racing. "This is harassment. I'm on vacation, and you have no right to approach me here." Kane stepped closer, and Sarah noticed 2 other men emerging from the shadows behind him. She recognized them as the ones who had been watching her all evening. "Actually, Dr. Martinez, we have every right. You see, this ship sails in international waters, which makes things much more flexible regarding certain legal matters." "What do you want?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear rising in her throat. "Simple. We want you to withdraw your lawsuit and destroy all your research data regarding our client's operations. In return, we'll make sure you have a very comfortable retirement. Refuse, and I'm afraid your vacation might not end as pleasantly as you'd hoped." Sarah glanced around the deck, hoping to see other passengers or crew members, but they were completely alone. The nearest lifeboats were at least 50 feet away, and the ocean below looked black and forbidding. "You're threatening me on a cruise ship? Do you realize how insane this sounds?" Kane's smile never wavered. "Dr. Martinez, you've caused our client considerable trouble with your meddling. The coral reefs will survive just fine without your interference, but I'm not sure the same can be said about you if you continue down this path." One of Kane's associates, a muscular man with scarred knuckles, stepped forward. "Boss, maybe the lady needs some time to think about it. Ocean air can be real refreshing for making tough decisions." Sarah backed toward the railing, her mind racing through possible escape routes. She was a strong swimmer, having grown up on the California coast, but jumping into the Pacific at night would be suicide. The water temperature was probably around 60 degrees, and they were hundreds of miles from the nearest land. "I won't back down," she said firmly. "What Meridian is doing is destroying entire ecosystems. Those reefs took thousands of years to grow, and Your company is killing them for profit. Kane's expression hardened. That's unfortunate, Dr. Martinez. Really unfortunate. He nodded to his men, who began moving toward her from both sides. Sarah grabbed a deck chair and hurled it at the nearest man, catching him off guard. He stumbled backward, cursing loudly, while she sprinted toward the ship's interior. But Kane had anticipated her move, positioning himself between her and the door. She veered toward the port side of the ship, hoping to find crew quarters or another way inside. The sound of pursuit echoed behind her as she ran along the narrow walkway that circled the upper deck. Her sneakers slipped on the wet surface, and she had to grab the railing to keep from falling. The men were gaining on her, their heavier footsteps getting closer with each passing second. At the far end of the deck, Sarah found herself trapped against the railing with nowhere left to run. Kane and his men approached slowly, like predators savoring the moment before the kill. You had your chance to do this the easy way, Kane said, pulling a syringe from his jacket pocket. This will make you very sleepy, and when you wake up, you'll be back home with no memory of our little conversation. Of course, you might also find yourself more agreeable to our client's terms. Stay away from me, Sarah shouted, hoping someone might hear and come to investigate. But her voice was swallowed by the wind and the constant rumble of the ship's engines. The scarred man lunged forward, trying to grab her arms, but Sarah twisted away and landed a solid kick to his shin. He howled in pain and anger, grabbing for her again with both hands. This time he caught her wrist, his grip like a vice. Enough games, Kane snapped. Hold her still. The second man grabbed Sarah's other arm while she struggled desperately to break free. Kane approached with the syringe, but Sarah managed to wrench one arm loose and struck the needle from his hand. It clattered across the deck and disappeared into a drainage grate. You little witch, Kane snarled. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. He grabbed Sarah by the throat, his fingers digging into her windpipe. Your research dies with you tonight, along with any chance of Meridian facing consequences for their operations. Sarah clawed at his hands, gasping for air as black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The other men held her legs as Kane began dragging her toward the railing. She realized with horror what they intended to do. Please, she whispered. You don't have to do this. I'll destroy the research. I'll drop the lawsuit. Kane paused, loosening his grip slightly. Too late for that, Dr. Martinez. You've already caused too much damage. The only way to ensure our client's security is to make sure you disappear permanently. Tragic accident at sea. Happens more often than you'd think. With a surge of adrenaline born from pure desperation, Sarah drove her knee upward into Kane's groin. He doubled over, releasing his grip on her throat, and she immediately grabbed the nearest man's wrist and bit down hard. He screamed and let go, giving her just enough freedom to break away from their grasp. But there was nowhere left to run. The three men quickly surrounded her again, backing her against the railing until she was leaning backward over the churning water far below. The ship's wake stretched out like a white scar against the dark ocean, and Sarah realized that once she hit that water, she would disappear forever. Kane wiped blood from his lip and smiled coldly. Goodbye, Dr. Martinez. Enjoy your swim. The men rushed forward simultaneously, and Sarah felt herself being lifted off her feet. For a moment, she was suspended in air, the wind rushing past her face as the ship's lights grew smaller above her. Then, she was falling, the cold Pacific rushing up to meet her with terrifying speed. The impact drove the breath from her lungs and sent shock waves through her entire body. The salt water burned her throat and nostrils as she sank beneath the surface, the ocean closing over her head like a liquid tomb. Above her, she could see the cruise ship's lights growing dimmer as the massive vessel continued on its course, carrying her would-be killers away into the night. Sarah kicked frantically toward the surface, her lungs burning from the impact and the frigid water already sapping strength from her muscles. When she finally broke through, gasping and coughing up seawater, the ship was already hundreds of yards away. Its lights twinkled like distant stars, and she could hear the faint sound of music and laughter from the passengers who had no idea what had just happened on the upper deck. The ocean around her was completely black, stretching endlessly in all directions. small waves lapped over her head, and she had to fight constantly just to keep her mouth and nose above water. The life jacket storage compartments were back on the ship, and she had nothing but her clothes and her swimming ability to keep her alive. Sarah tried to remember everything she knew about survival at sea. The water temperature would cause hypothermia within hours, maybe less. Sharks were a possibility, though they rarely attacked humans at night. Dehydration would become a factor if she somehow managed to survive until dawn. But her most immediate concern was simply staying afloat long enough for someone to notice she was missing. Would Kane and his men report her disappearance? Probably not immediately. They would likely wait until morning and then claim she must have fallen overboard during the night. By then, the ship would be hundreds of miles away, and any search and rescue operation would be looking in the wrong area. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Sarah felt despair threatening to overwhelm her. She was alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no way to call for help and no reasonable chance of rescue. The men who had tried to kill her were probably celebrating their success right now, confident that Meridian Industries' problems had just disappeared beneath the waves. But Sarah Martinez had not spent her entire career studying the ocean without learning a few things about survival. She forced herself to remain calm, conserving energy by floating on her back when possible and swimming only when necessary to maintain her position. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear night sky, and she used them to maintain her sense of direction. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah's body grew numb from the cold water, and several times she felt herself beginning to lose consciousness. Each time, she forced herself back to alertness, knowing that falling asleep would mean death. She thought about her research, about the coral reefs she had dedicated her life to protecting, about the justice she had hoped to achieve through her lawsuit against Meridian. As the first gray light of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon, Sarah spotted something that made her heart leap with hope. In the distance, barely visible against the lightening sky, she could see the silhouette of a ship approaching from the north. It was moving slowly, methodically, as if searching for something. Sarah began swimming toward the vessel, using every ounce of strength she had left. As she got closer, she could make out more details. It was a military ship, smaller than the cruise liner but bristling with communication equipment and what looked like rescue gear. On its hull, she could see the distinctive markings of the United States Navy. The ship continued its search pattern, moving back and forth across the area where Sarah had been floating. She waved her arms and shouted, though her voice was hoarse from the salt water and her throat raw from hours of exposure. For several terrifying minutes, it seemed like the ship might pass her by without noticing her small form in the vast ocean. Then, a spotlight swept across the water and stopped directly on her. Voices began shouting orders from the deck, and Sarah saw crew members rushing to deploy rescue equipment. Within minutes, a small boat was launched from the ship's stern, heading directly toward her position. As the rescue boat approached, Sarah could see that its crew consisted of 4 men in military diving gear. The man at the front of the boat was tall and muscular, with short-cropped hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was something about his bearing and the way the other men deferred to him that suggested he was their leader. "Ma'am, we're going to get you out of there," he called out as the boat pulled alongside her. "Can you grab the rope?" Sarah's fingers were so numb from the cold that she could barely feel the rescue line, but she managed to wrap it around her wrist. Strong hands pulled her from the water and wrapped her in thermal blankets while someone else checked her vital signs. "How long were you in the water?" the team leader asked, his voice calm but concerned. "Since midnight," Sarah managed to say through chattering teeth. "Maybe 6 hours." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's a long time to survive in these conditions. You're lucky we found you when we did." He paused, studying her face. "I'm Commander Jake Mitchell, Navy SEALs. What's your name? And how did you end up out here?" "Sarah Martinez," she replied. "I was thrown off a cruise ship by men who were trying to kill me." The rescue boat fell silent except for the sound of the engine as they headed back toward the naval vessel. Commander Mitchell's expression had grown deadly serious, and Sarah could see something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Men tried to kill you," he repeated quietly. On a cruise, sure, the medical bay of the USS Triton was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the Pacific Ocean that had nearly claimed Sarah's life. She sat on the examination table, wrapped in heated blankets, while the ship's doctor checked her for signs of hypothermia and other injuries. Commander Jake Mitchell stood nearby, his arms crossed, and his expression grim as he listened to her full account of what had happened aboard the cruise ship. "Dr. Martinez," the doctor said, shining a small flashlight into her eyes, "you're incredibly lucky to be alive. 6 hours in water that cold should have killed you. Your core body temperature was dangerously low when we pulled you out, but you're going to make a full recovery." Sarah nodded gratefully, though her attention was focused on Commander Mitchell. There was something about his intense blue eyes and the way he carried himself that commanded respect from everyone around him. She had heard stories about Navy SEALs and their legendary toughness, but she had never expected to meet one under circumstances like these. "Tell me more about these men who attacked you," Mitchell said, pulling up a chair beside the examination table. "You said they worked for Meridian Industries?" "Robert Kane was their leader," Sarah replied, her voice still hoarse from the salt water. "He knew details about my lawsuit and my research that weren't public knowledge. The other 2 men didn't give their names, but they were clearly professional muscle. One had scarred knuckles like a boxer, and the other had a tattoo on his neck that looked military." Mitchell's expression darkened. "Military tattoo? Can you describe it?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall the details from those terrifying moments on the deck. It was an eagle with spread wings, holding something in its talons. Maybe arrows or lightning bolts. It was on the left side of his neck, just below his ear. "That sounds like a mercenary outfit called Blackwater Solutions," Mitchell said grimly. "They recruit former military personnel for corporate security work. Not all of it legal." The ship's communication officer appeared in the doorway of the medical bay. "Commander, we've established contact with the cruise ship Ocean's Dream. They're approximately 200 miles southeast of our current position." Mitchell stood immediately. "Have they reported any missing passengers?" "Negative, sir. According to their manifest, all passengers are accounted for." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her recent ocean ordeal. "They're covering it up. Kane and his men are probably telling everyone I never boarded the ship, or that I got off at the last port." "Not for long," Mitchell said with cold determination. "Petty Officer Harrison, I want you to run a complete background check on Dr. Martinez's story. Contact the FBI, Coast Guard, and anyone else who might have information about this Meridian Industries case. I also want satellite imagery of the area where we found her, going back 12 hours. "Yes, sir," the communication officer replied before disappearing down the corridor. Mitchell turned back to Sarah. "Dr. Martinez, I need you to understand something. What happened to you tonight wasn't just attempted murder. It was an attack on American citizens in international waters. That makes it a matter of national security, and it puts it squarely in my jurisdiction." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. "Commander, I have backup copies of all my research hidden in 3 different locations. If we can expose what Meridian is doing to those coral reefs, we can stop them permanently." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Mitchell assured her. "But first, we need to deal with the immediate threat. Those men think you're dead, which gives us a significant tactical advantage." Over the next several hours, the USS Triton became a hub of intense activity. Mitchell's team of Navy SEALs worked with military intelligence analysts to piece together a complete picture of Meridian Industries' illegal operations. What they discovered was far worse than even Sarah had imagined. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, the ship's intelligence officer, briefed them on her findings. Meridian Industries has been dumping toxic waste in protected waters for at least 5 years. But that's just the beginning. They've also been using their shipping routes to smuggle weapons to conflict zones, and they have connections to several international crime syndicates. Sarah stared at the satellite images spread across the briefing room table. They showed Meridian cargo ships in locations that didn't match their official shipping manifests, often in areas where environmental damage was clearly visible from space. "My research was just the tip of the iceberg," she said quietly. "They weren't just trying to silence me because of the coral reefs. They were protecting an entire criminal empire." Mitchell studied the intelligence reports with the focused intensity of a predator planning an attack. This explains why they were willing to commit murder on a cruise ship. Dr. Martinez's lawsuit wasn't just threatening their dumping operations. It was threatening to expose their entire network. Commander, Santos continued, we've also identified the 3 men who attacked Dr. Martinez. Robert Kane is a former CIA operative who now works as a corporate fixer for various criminal organizations. The 2 men with him are indeed former military, Marcus Webb and Tony Castellano, both dishonorably discharged and currently employed by Blackwater Solutions. Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and fear at having names to go with the faces of her attackers. What happens now? Do we contact the authorities? Mitchell exchanged glances with his intelligence officer. Dr. Martinez, I need to be completely honest with you about the situation we're facing. Meridian Industries has connections that reach very high up in both government and law enforcement. If we go through normal channels, there's a good chance that Kane and his men will disappear before they can be arrested. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we handle this the SEAL way, Mitchell said with a grim smile. We're going to intercept that cruise ship, gather evidence of what happened to you, and make sure these criminals face justice. But it's going to be dangerous, and I can't guarantee your safety if you choose to be involved. Sarah thought about the 6 hours she had spent in the freezing Pacific, fighting to stay alive while the men who tried to murder her sailed away confident in their success. She thought about the coral reefs being destroyed by Meridian's toxic waste, and the other innocent people who might become targets if this criminal network wasn't stopped. I'm in, she said firmly. Those men tried to kill me because I was fighting to protect the ocean. I'm not going to stop now just because they escalated their tactics. Mitchell nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. But first, we need to make some preparations. As far as the world knows, you died tonight when you fell overboard from the Ocean's Dream. We're going to keep it that way until we're ready to make our move. The next 12 hours were among the most intense of Sarah's life. The USS Triton raced through the Pacific at maximum speed, closing the distance to the cruise ship while Mitchell's team prepared for what they called a direct action mission. Sarah watched in amazement as the SEALs checked their equipment with methodical precision, night vision goggles, climbing gear, cameras, and weapons that she couldn't identify but that looked extremely sophisticated. The plan is simple, Mitchell explained during their final briefing. We board the Ocean's Dream at 0200 hours when most passengers are asleep. Dr. Martinez will guide us to the location where the attack took place, and we'll gather physical evidence. Meanwhile, my team will locate Kane and his associates and place them under arrest. What if they resist? Sarah asked. Mitchell's smile was cold and predatory. Dr. Martinez, these men made the mistake of trying to commit murder in an area patrolled by the United States Navy. If they resist arrest, they'll discover why SEALs have the reputation we do. Sarah spent the remaining hours before the mission studying the cruise ship's layout with the intelligence team. The Ocean's Dream was a massive vessel with 14 decks and over 3,000 passengers, but the SEALs had obtained detailed blueprints that showed every corridor, stateroom, and service area. Kane and his men are staying in adjoining suites on Deck 12, Santos reported. According to the passenger manifest, they boarded under false names, but facial recognition software confirmed their identities from security camera footage. As midnight approached, Sarah found herself standing on the deck of the Triton, watching the lights of the cruise ship growing larger on the horizon. She was dressed in dark clothing provided by the Navy, with a waterproof camera to document evidence and a radio headset to maintain communication with Mitchell's team. Are you sure about this, Dr. Martinez? Mitchell asked, appearing beside her in full combat gear. Once we board that ship, there's no turning back. Kane and his men are dangerous, and they'll be desperate when they realize you're still alive. Sarah looked out at the ocean that had nearly claimed her life just 24 hours earlier. Somewhere in those dark waters, toxic waste from Meridian Industries was slowly poisoning the marine ecosystems she had dedicated her career to protecting. The men responsible for that destruction had tried to silence her permanently, confident that their wealth and connections would protect them from consequences. Commander, she said quietly, I've spent my entire adult life studying the ocean and the creatures that live in it. What Meridian is doing isn't just environmental crime. It's an attack on the future of our planet. If we don't stop them now, They'll keep destroying everything I've worked to protect. Mitchell nodded. Then, let's go show them what happens when you mess with the Navy's turf. The boarding operation began at exactly 0200 hours. Mitchell's team used specialized equipment to approach the cruise ship silently, their small boats invisible to the vessel's radar systems. Sarah watched in amazement as the SEALs scaled the side of the massive ship using climbing gear, moving like shadows against the metal hull. Within minutes, she found herself on the same upper deck where Kane and his men had tried to murder her. The area looked peaceful and ordinary in the moonlight, giving no hint of the violence that had occurred there. But, as Sarah examined the scene more closely, she began finding evidence that the ship's crew had missed. There, she whispered, pointing to a section of railing near where she had been thrown overboard. That's blood on the metal. It must be from when I bit one of Kane's men. Mitchell carefully photographed the bloodstains while other team members collected samples for DNA analysis. Near a drainage grate, they found fragments of the syringe Kane had intended to use on Sarah, along with traces of a powerful sedative that would have left her unconscious and helpless. This is more than enough evidence to prove attempted murder, Mitchell said grimly. Now let's go pay a visit to the men responsible. Moving through the cruise ship's corridors like ghosts, the SEAL team made their way to Deck 12 where Kane and his associates were staying. Sarah's heart pounded as they approached the suite where her would-be killers were sleeping, probably confident that they had successfully eliminated the threat to Meridian Industries operations. Mitchell held up a hand, signaling for silence as he listened at the door. Voices could be heard from inside. Kane and his men were awake, apparently discussing their next moves. The Coast Guard will call off the search by tomorrow morning, Kane was saying. Dr. Martinez will be listed as missing and presumed drowned. By the time we reach Los Angeles, Meridian's legal problems will have disappeared along with her. What about her research? Another voice asked. Sarah recognized it as belonging to the man with the scarred knuckles. Her lawyers have copies, but, without her testimony, they can't prove the connection between the dumping and the reef damage. The case will fall apart, and Meridian will be free to continue operations. Sarah felt rage building in her chest as she listened to the men casually discussing her murder and its benefits for their criminal employers. But Mitchell's calm presence beside her helped her maintain focus on the mission. The SEAL commander made a series of hand signals to his team, and Sarah watched them prepare to breach the door with military precision. She knew that in the next few seconds, Kane and his associates would discover that their perfect murder hadn't gone quite according to plan. Mitchell looked at Sarah one final time, his eyes conveying both determination and a promise of justice. Then, he gave the signal, and everything happened at once. The door exploded inward as the SEALs moved into the suite with overwhelming force. Shouts of alarm and confusion echoed from inside, followed by the sound of struggling and commands barked in military voices. Within 30 seconds, the suite fell silent except for Mitchell's calm voice speaking into his radio. Package secured. 3 suspects in custody. Dr. Martinez is safe and unharmed. Sarah stepped into the suite to see Kane and his 2 associates on their knees, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, and expressions of shock and disbelief on their faces. Kane's eyes went wide when he saw her, and his face went pale as the implications of her survival began to sink in. Impossible, he whispered. You're supposed to be dead. Mitchell stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the room. Mr. Kane, I'm Commander Jake Mitchell, United States Navy SEALs. You and your associates are under arrest for the attempted murder of Dr. Sarah Martinez, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of federal laws regarding crimes committed in international waters. Kane tried to maintain his composure, but Sarah could see fear beginning to replace his usual arrogant confidence. You have no authority here. This is a civilian cruise ship in international waters. Actually, Mitchell replied with a cold smile. When the federal courthouse in San Diego buzzed with activity, as news crews and reporters gathered outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the key players in what media outlets were calling the biggest environmental crime case of the decade. 3 months had passed since Sarah Martinez's dramatic rescue by Navy SEALs, and the investigation into Meridian Industries had grown far beyond anyone's initial expectations. Sarah walked up the courthouse steps flanked by FBI agents, her head held high despite the chaos surrounding her. The past few months had been a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and constant security precautions as federal prosecutors built their case against Meridian Industries and its network of criminal associates. Commander Jake Mitchell waited for her inside the courthouse, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform, but maintaining the same commanding presence that had saved her life in the Pacific Ocean. Their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper during the long months of investigation, though both had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given the ongoing legal proceedings. "Ready for this, Dr. Martinez?" Mitchell asked as they met in the hallway outside the courtroom. Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the folder containing her research data. "I've been ready for this fight since the day I discovered what Meridian was doing to those coral reefs. The fact that they tried to murder me just proves how desperate they are to hide the truth." The courtroom was packed with spectators, including environmental activists, corporate lawyers, and government officials who understood the far-reaching implications of the case. At the defendant's table sat Robert Kane and his two associates, looking considerably less confident than they had on the cruise ship. Behind them, an army of expensive lawyers huddled around documents and whispered urgent consultations. Federal Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh approached the bench with the bearing of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. She had been handpicked to lead the case due to her expertise in both environmental law and organized crime prosecutions, and her opening statement would set the tone for everything that followed. "Your Honor," Walsh began, addressing Judge Patricia Hernandez, "what we have before us today is not simply a case of environmental crime or even attempted murder. What we have is a systematic conspiracy by Meridian Industries to destroy protected marine ecosystems while using violence and intimidation to silence anyone who threatened to expose their operations." The prosecutor's voice carried clearly throughout the packed courtroom as she outlined the government's case. "The evidence will show that for over 5 years, Meridian Industries used their shipping operations as cover for dumping millions of gallons of toxic waste into protected marine sanctuaries. When Dr. Sarah Martinez's research threatened to expose this environmental destruction, they hired professional killers to eliminate her permanently." Sarah felt all eyes in the courtroom turn toward her as Walsh continued. "Dr. Martinez survived what can only be described as a professional assassination attempt, and her courage in coming forward has allowed federal investigators to uncover a criminal enterprise that extends far beyond environmental crime. The evidence will show that Meridian Industries has been involved in weapons smuggling, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder." The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Blackwood who represented some of the most powerful corporations in America, rose to present his opening statement. His strategy became clear within the first few sentences. He intended to portray Sarah as an unstable environmental extremist who had fabricated the entire story for personal gain. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackwood said smoothly, "the prosecution would have you believe that my clients attempted to murder Dr. Martinez because of her research into coral reef damage. But the evidence will show that Dr. Martinez has a history of making wild accusations against corporations she disagrees with, and that her so-called attempted murder was nothing more than a tragic accident that she has chosen to exploit for financial gain." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but Mitchell's steady presence beside her helped her maintain her composure. She had expected the defense to attack her credibility, but hearing her near-death experience described as a publicity stunt still stung. The first week of testimony focused on establishing the scope of Meridian Industries' environmental crimes. Sarah took the stand on the third day, walking the jury through her research methodology and the evidence she had gathered over 2 years of investigation. "Can you describe what you found when you analyzed water samples from the protected marine sanctuary near Catalina Island?" Prosecutor Walsh asked. Sarah pulled up a digital presentation showing microscopic images of coral tissue samples. "What I found was systematic poisoning of the entire ecosystem. The coral polyps showed signs of chemical burns consistent with exposure to industrial solvents and heavy metals. The damage patterns indicated that toxic waste was being dumped regularly over an extended period. And what was the source of this contamination?" shipping manifests, and GPS tracking data showed that Meridian Industries cargo vessels had been operating in the area during every period when elevated toxin levels were detected. When I compared their official shipping routes with satellite imagery, it became clear that they were making undocumented stops in the protected waters. The defense's cross-examination was aggressive and personal, focusing on Sarah's divorce and the financial pressure she had faced during her legal battle with Meridian. Blackwood tried to suggest that she had fabricated evidence to support a lucrative lawsuit, but Sarah's thorough documentation and scientific methodology made his accusations ring hollow. The turning point in the case came when Commander Mitchell took the stand. His testimony about the rescue operation and the evidence gathered aboard the cruise ship provided crucial corroboration for Sarah's account of the attempted murder. Commander Mitchell, Prosecutor Walsh asked, "When your team boarded the cruise ship Ocean's Dream, what did you find at the location where Dr. Martinez said she had been attacked?" Mitchell's voice was calm and professional, but there was steel underneath as he described the physical evidence. "We found bloodstains on the deck railing, fragments of a hypodermic syringe containing a powerful sedative, and defensive wounds consistent with Dr. Martinez's account of fighting off her attackers." The forensic evidence was overwhelming. "And what was the condition of the three defendants when your team located them in their stateroom?" "They were awake and discussing the success of their operation. We recorded conversations in which they explicitly stated that Dr. Martinez had been eliminated and that her research would no longer pose a threat to Meridian Industries." The defense tried to challenge the legality of the SEAL boarding operation, but Judge Hernandez ruled that the evidence was admissible since the crime had occurred in international waters under U.S. Navy jurisdiction. As the trial progressed, federal investigators revealed the full scope of Meridian Industries' criminal empire. Company executives had used their shipping network to smuggle weapons to conflict zones in Africa and Southeast Asia, laundering the profits through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The most damaging testimony came from Marcus Webb, one of Cain's associates, who had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His detailed account of Meridian's operations painted a picture of a corporation that had been systematically violating federal and international law for years. "Mr. Webb," Prosecutor Walsh asked, "what were your specific instructions regarding Dr. Martinez?" Webb glanced nervously at Cain before answering. "Mr. Cain told us that Dr. Martinez had to be eliminated permanently. He said her research was threatening to expose operations that were worth hundreds of millions of dollars to Meridian. We were supposed to make it look like an accident. And what was your understanding of the consequences if Dr. Martinez's research became public?" Cain said it would destroy the company. Not just the environmental stuff, but everything. The weapons shipments, the money laundering, all of it. He said Dr. Martinez was a threat to the entire organization. The prosecution's case was bolstered by financial records seized from Meridian's offices, showing payments to Blackwater Solutions and other mercenary groups for what were euphemistically described as security services. Bank transfers revealed a pattern of payments that coincided with environmental activists and regulatory officials either backing down from investigations or, in some cases, disappearing entirely. During the fourth week of trial, Sarah received a late-night phone call that would add another dramatic dimension to the case. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Patel, a marine biologist who had been working on coral reef restoration in the Caribbean. "Dr. Martinez," Patel said, her voice shaking with fear. "I think Meridian Industries has been operating in our area too. I've been getting death threats ever since I started documenting coral damage near their shipping routes. After seeing the news about your case, I think I'm in danger." Sarah immediately contacted the FBI, and within hours, Dr. Patel was under federal protection while investigators examined her research. What they found was devastating. Evidence that Meridian's toxic dumping operations extended far beyond the Pacific coast, encompassing protected marine areas throughout the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. The revelation that Meridian had been conducting illegal operations across multiple jurisdictions strengthened the government's case significantly. It also demonstrated the crucial importance of Sarah's survival and testimony. Without her courage in coming forward, the full scope of environmental destruction might never have been discovered. As the trial entered its final phase, the defense made one last desperate attempt to discredit Sarah's testimony. They brought in expert witnesses who questioned her research methodology and suggested that the coral damage could have been caused by natural factors rather than industrial contamination. But the scientific evidence was overwhelming, and federal investigators had discovered additional proof of Meridian's criminal activities that went far beyond Sarah's original research. Recorded conversations between company executives revealed that they were fully aware of the environmental damage they were causing and had made deliberate decisions to continue their illegal dumping operations. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Walsh stood before the jury with quiet intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sarah Martinez risked her life to expose the truth about Meridian Industries' criminal operations. When she refused to be silenced by threats and intimidation, they tried to murder her. The fact that she survived that attempt and continued fighting for justice is a testament to both her courage and the effectiveness of our military and law enforcement agencies." Walsh gestured toward the mountain of evidence that had been presented during the trial. "The defense would have you believe that Dr. Martinez fabricated this entire conspiracy for personal gain. But the evidence speaks for itself. Meridian Industries has been systematically destroying some of the most important marine ecosystems on our planet while using violence and intimidation to prevent exposure of their crimes." The defense's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt and the complexity of environmental science, but their case had been severely undermined by the testimony of Webb and other cooperating witnesses. Blackwood's final appeal to the jury felt desperate and unconvincing in the face of overwhelming evidence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Kane and his associates were found guilty on all counts, including attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of federal environmental protection laws. The Meridian Industries executives who had ordered the hit on Sarah received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters, Sarah felt a profound sense of both relief and accomplishment. The legal battle that had nearly cost her life was finally over, and the criminals responsible for destroying marine ecosystems would face serious consequences for their actions. Commander Mitchell stood beside her as she addressed the media, his presence a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything in the cold Pacific waters. "This case was never just about me," Sarah said to the assembled reporters. "It was about protecting our oceans and the incredible ecosystems that depend on them for survival. The fact that Meridian Industries was willing to commit murder to hide their crimes just shows how important this fight really is." As the crowd of reporters began to disperse, Mitchell approached Sarah with a serious expression. "Dr. Martinez, I need to tell you something. The Navy has been monitoring Meridian's shipping operations since your rescue, and we've discovered that their criminal network extended far beyond what was revealed in court." Sarah felt a familiar chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" "Intelligence analysts have identified at least 12 other corporations that were using Meridian's shipping routes for illegal activities. The investigation is far from over, and we may need your expertise to help expose the full scope of environmental crimes being committed in international waters." Sarah looked out at the Pacific Ocean, visible from the courthouse steps, its surface sparkling in the afternoon sunlight. Somewhere beneath those waves, coral reefs were beginning to recover from the toxic contamination that had nearly destroyed them. Other marine ecosystems around the world were still under threat from criminals who believed their wealth and power made them untouchable. "Commander," she said with determination, "if there are more criminals out there destroying our oceans, then we have more work to do. They made a mistake when they tried to silence me by throwing me into the sea. They should have remembered that the ocean is where I do my best work." Mitchell smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Dr. Martinez, I think this is the beginning of a very productive partnership. Those corporate criminals are about to learn that Navy SEALs and marine biologists make a formidable team." As they walked away from the courthouse together, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrifying night on the cruise ship. She had begun as a lone scientist fighting to protect coral reefs, but she had emerged as a key figure in a much larger battle for environmental justice. The men who had tried to murder her had inadvertently created one of their most dangerous enemies, a survivor who understood both the science of ocean conservation and the reality of corporate crime. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and mysterious as always. But now Sarah saw it not just as a natural wonder to be studied and protected, but as a battlefield where the future of the planet would be decided. And thanks to her unlikely alliance with Commander Mitchell and his Navy SEALs, she was no longer fighting that battle alone. The war for the ocean's future was far from over, but for the first time since discovering Meridian's crimes, Sarah felt confident that justice and environmental protection would ultimately prevail. The criminals who had ruled the waves through fear and violence were about to discover that their reign was ending, one case at a time. Rude Dr. Martinez into the ocean. You committed a crime in an area under U.S. Navy jurisdiction. That makes this a military matter, and it puts you under my authority. You gentlemen are about to discover why it's never a good idea to mess with Navy SEALs. As the three criminals were led away under heavy guard, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. The men who had tried to kill her were finally facing justice, and the evidence they had gathered would expose Meridian Industries' entire criminal operation. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. Meridian was a powerful corporation with connections throughout the business and political worlds. The legal battle ahead would be long and dangerous, and there would likely be other attempts to silence her. Standing on the deck of the cruise ship as dawn broke over the Pacific, Sarah realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a marine biologist fighting to protect coral reefs. She had become a key witness in a case that could bring down an entire criminal empire, and she had gained allies in the form of some of the most elite warriors in the U.S. military. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, beautiful and mysterious in the morning light. But now Sarah saw it differently than she had before. It wasn't just a natural wonder to be studied and protected. It was also a battlefield where the forces of good and evil clashed for the future of the planet. And thanks to Commander Mitchell and his Navy SEALs, she was no longer fighting that battle alone. Sarah nodded, suddenly, feeling safer than she had in months. Something about this man's presence made her believe that her ordeal might finally be over. They work for Meridian Industries. I've been investigating their illegal dumping operations, and they wanted to stop me permanently. Commander Mitchell's jaw tightened. Ma'am, you just got thrown into the ocean by the wrong people. Because if there's one thing those corporate thugs should have learned before they tried to murder someone in Navy territory, it's that SEALs don't leave anyone behind. And we definitely don't let criminals get away with attempted murder. As the rescue boat reached the naval ship, and Sarah was helped aboard, she realized that her nightmare was far from over. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt like she might actually have a chance at both survival and justice. The men who had tried to kill her had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of the United States Navy and the determination of the elite warriors who ruled these waves.